I'm standing in front of this beautiful quilt that I pieced while I was at Quilt Retreat, and it's called Loveliness by Corey Yoder. And I did use her fabric for it as well. I think it's called Summer something. But anyway, I'm going to get right into the quilt. But I haven't forgotten about Sister. You would not believe she is just huge. Towards the end of the video, I'm going to bring in Sister into my sewing room and introduce you to her. See if she remembers any of you guys, because my gosh, she's getting to be an old lady now. It's a really fun quilt to quilt, but it doesn't have borders on it. And I wanted to talk to you about borders today. The pattern doesn't suggest that you put borders on, but remember, it's your quilt, so you can do whatever you want with it. I've decided to put borders on it, and I'm going to be using some of this fabric that is from the line, and I have my borders all cut. But first, I wanted to talk about borders. First things first, why should you add borders? Really, it depends on the look you want. And again, it's your quilt, so you can do whatever you want on your quilt. Borders tend to make the quilt look a little more traditional, while a quilt without borders might look a little more modern. Well, I'm making this quilt for my guest room, and I'm kind of trying to make it a little bit old-fashioned, maybe, just maybe a touch of farm style in there, but I thought this would be perfect for it. And I decided that I wanted borders, and then I have some really cute binding that's going to be perfect on it. But again, some borders are traditional, and some borders make a quilt look a little bit more modern. And it all depends on the look you want. So audition a border if you'd like a border. I also want to talk about something else. This quilt is done with these set-in triangles, okay? Right here. And they are on the bias. So this quilt is pieced like this. This is a row, this is a row, and this is a row. And to make the quilt look square, you put triangles on it. So this is one of the triangles that I've used. And when you work with triangles, guess what you get to work with? You work with the bias, which means it's stretchy. So this is the fabric on the grain, and it's straight. It doesn't stretch very much at all. It's going to stretch a little more on the width. Not a lot, but a little bit more. But if you turn it like this and stretch it on the bias, it is just really going to stretch. See that? It's tricky working with the bias. And what you have to do, so you don't have a quilt that is stretched out of shape, you want to lay it flat when you pin it. Make sure you don't stretch your seams. Look at that stretch. You just don't want to do that. And just be careful and work slow on your quilt. Now, there's a couple of things on borders and on the bias. You know, I'm a long arm quilter, and I see a lot of quilts come in, and they have all got various shapes. Some people have asked me, why doesn't my quilt lay straight or flat? And then I have a corner that's, you know, like pointy like this. But there are a lot of quilts that come into me that are what I call hourglass quilts. So this would be the top side and the very top. And then as you come down to the middle, it's like this. And then it goes out again like this. So it's kind of an hourglass shape. And the reason for that is because of how you put on the borders. So I want you to pay attention if you want to learn about borders, because that's what I'm going to teach you today. You're going to want to measure your quilt in 3 places to determine how much or what measurement your border is. Now this quilt measures 68 wide and it's 85 inches long, but that is going to change because of the borders, and I'll tell you about it. So when you measure your quilt from the width to the width across, and you measure it in 3 places: on the top, at the bottom, and in the middle. And those measurements may be off half an inch. If you didn't stretch it too much when you sewed it. I've had some quilts that I've made be off quite a bit, and I just literally throw my hands up and say, oh, forget it. It is what it is. But I've been a lot more careful lately, and I want to challenge myself to make nice straight quilts. So I measure my quilt in those 3 inches, and that's how I got the 68 inches wide. And then I measured the length from the top to the bottom, but I measured the length here on this line, in the middle, on this line, and on the edge, on this line, on the other side. And that's how I came up with 85 inches long. So I have my border pieces cut and marked. I have my 68 inches wide, and then I have 94 inches long. How did I get 94 inches? Well, it's some simple math. And math, oh my gosh, that's the worst part for me of quilting. So I'm so grateful that I have the engineer, because I always say, hey, honey, I need you to check my math. And he comes and checks my math. What I did was when I just made 2 strips of 68 inch wide for the top and the bottom, and I'll sew those on, but they are going to make the quilt longer than the 85 inches. The border that I've cut is a 5-inch border. So I'm going to add 5 inches on to 85 inches, which equals 95 inches, right? But then there's a seam allowance. And remember, on each seam you sew, on each piece of fabric, there's a 1/4 of an inch that you're going to lose. So 2/4 of an inch on the top and 2/4 of an inch on the bottom equals 1 inch. So I subtracted an inch and I came up with 94 inches. So the side borders are going to be 94 inches long. Then what we're going to do next is sit down and pin them. And I'm going to show you how to pin them on your quilt so that it's even Steven. I'm going to show you how I put the borders on so they're straight and there's no stretching, and you won't have any leftover material or run short. I start with my border by putting the 2 ends together like this perfectly, and then now remember, this is the 68 inch border, and I'm going to come down and I'm just going to finger press that seam, that center seam, so I know it's there, and I'm going to put a pin in it so I know right where it is. Okay, so my center is marked on the border with my pin. Then I'm going to go, let's get this border out of the way here. Then I'm going to go to the top of the quilt. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the top of my quilt. So this is the top corner and this is the other top corner, and I'm going to put those 2 corners together and stick a pin in there, and then I'm going to go gently walk down without pulling, and as I go I'm lining up these points. So these square little points on the quilt, I'm putting those together as best I can, and that way I know that I'm not pulling or stretching everything. And then when I come to the center, I'm going to squeeze it like this, finger press it, and I'm going to stick a pin in on that little finger press fold. So there is my center of my quilt. Okay. So I'm going to start with my, where's my center again? With my border, and I'm going to match those 2 pins. And then I'm going to take this out to the end and match it here on the end. All right, now if you gently hold them together, there is no real gaps going on, and I can go ahead and no sags, no gaps, it's wonderful, and I can just go ahead and pin this on to my quilt, and then I should be able to sew it with no problems at all, with no stretching. I am going to put a few more pins in than I normally do because I am working with the bias. And again, I'm being very gentle with this bias. I do not want to stretch it. So I am using quite a few pins on this side so that I don't stretch that bias. But you know what? It's worth it in the end. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. We'll do the same thing. I'll put my end piece on, and it's a perfect fit on the end. And then I'm going to kind of hold it up, and it lays just so nicely. And where I really want to put extra pins is in that triangle, because as you sew, it is going to stretch, and the pins will keep it in place. Here we go. Okay, so let's take this to the machine and sew it. So I've got the border pinned with quite a few pins, and I have my trusty chick pin cushion here at the side to catch my pins or to receive my pins, and I'm just going to sew along a 1/4 inch seam all the way down, and we'll have borders on the top and the bottom of this quilt. I'm pretty excited. So it's all done, but I wanted to start with my very favorite block. I just think this is so cute with the green, and of course this is the border fabric. Let me zoom out and show you. Do you see how that border just makes the dark gray in the quilt pop? And check it out. Here's all of it. Remember, it's 94 inches long. So it's a big one, but it's going to go on a full-size bed. It will be so cute. I just can't wait. Thanks for checking in with me. Let me bring in Sister. I bet you're dying to see how big she is. She's huge. So, just so you know, I just bring Sister into the quilting room just for you guys because she's so much fun. But I'm going to let her wings go. I'm holding them down. Come on, look at that. Isn't she a gorgeous chick? She's still a chick. And anyway, I think she's a full-fledged teenager, but she's going to go through a phase pretty soon where she's going to begin to molt again, meaning getting even more feathers in. And she's just not going to be very pretty. She'll be all scraggly and everything. But take a look at, she's got her comb coming in. Can you see that? There you go. And Sister really enjoys the quilt. So she says. But anyway, till next week. Sister, you want to say goodbye? Bye. Thanks for tuning in today. I really enjoy teaching quilting, and I hope you enjoy learning, especially about borders. They can be important. They can make or break a quilt. So if you like what you see, I would appreciate if you would subscribe. I think it's on this side, but the camera does funny things, and I always want to clip on this side or point to this side. But subscribe anyway, and I'll see you next week.